Well, recording in progress indeed, as the lady says, and we're going to broadcast along with Pat McGard for a change. How are you, Pat? Sun shining in Donegal?
I love it. It's a great morning. We start every morning with the weather forecast, but hey, we have to admit, Jesus, this is now I won't preach it, and it'll be the wrong word, but hey, that's what is it now about the fifth, sixth day of absolutely stunning weather.
That's right. And they
Like I think
forecast another.
yesterday was 24.
They're
What's that?
forecasting another week.
Yeah, it's
It's not,
unbelievable. I noticed my grass is as dry as could be, so I better not light
and you
any
shouldn't cut.
cigars anywhere near
Don't
there.
cut grass. It's dry, and when it's wet,
Yeah.
there's a strong case for not cutting it then either.
I am very much in favor of both of those. I had a friend, by the way, he said to me, no, he said, Pat, I have a great garden, concrete.
Well, like that on a private level, that makes a lot of sense, but on a public, on a world level, it's a bit bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about some seriously bad stuff. The BBC is not covering. Well, let's put it like this: the last year, as I remember, they didn't cover the 12th live the way they had traditionally. Is that right? Can you
Yeah.
remember?
Yeah. I think they filmed a few bits and then they put a sort of a composite
Yeah.
or compilation program out later on the evening. Now they give it a full hour and so on, but it was a departure from the norm. So I presume, no, there was all sorts of things. This is the BBC, the loyalists and the Orange Orders and so on. That this was the BBC giving in to, I presume nationalism or something. But I think it was more to do with the fact that the BBC sort of says, the audience, I know, Jude, like these Orange Parades, you live in Northern Ireland much more than I. You tell me what they're all about.
Well, I come to those in a second, but just before we leave the BBC, there was a time, as anybody in the BBC will tell you, when the head of the Orange Order and the director of the BBC Northern Ireland would sit at a window and watch the parade go past while sipping tea or maybe a drink or whatever, which shows you the extent to which the BBC was bound up with the Orange Order. They've now shortened it, and I think that's reasonable. I mean, regardless of your feelings for them, I think an edited hour isn't bad at all, especially if it goes out, 8 o'clock or something like that. Now, what do I think of the Orange Order? I've got into serious trouble by answering that question, Pat, I'll have you know. But here I go again. The Orange Order is an anti-Catholic organization. It was founded on the death of 30 Catholics in a sectarian riot. It's over the last whatever number of years, 150 years old or something like that. It has involved riots again and again, deaths again and again on a sectarian basis. It obviously stirs the sectarian pot. And the British government had to, in the 19th century, had to ban it altogether for about 10 years because it was so bad. Its rules, which forbid a Catholic, for example, to join it. I think it also forbids women. I'm not 100% sure of that. I think women have a separate sort of antechamber that they're sent to. But no Catholic can join it. You can't join it if your spouse is a Catholic. If you're an Orange man, you're not allowed to attend Catholic ceremonies in a Catholic church, except they've changed that. I don't think they have. In other words, while it's a good day out for the average person, I'm sure they don't think through all these history and the rules and the stupidities and the sort of bad things in history. I'm sure they don't do that. They go out for a day like today and they enjoy it and they're at the field and so on. But I think there must be a way of giving those people the pleasure of a day like that without having in the background or even the foreground an anti-Catholic organization. And we shouldn't have anti-Catholic organizations in the 21st century any more than anti-Black organizations, anti-Jewish organizations, anti-Palestinian organizations, or any of the other anti-organization titles you might want to come up with. So that's my rant over for today, Pat. So what do you think of that?
You said that was the most comprehensive answer I think you've ever given me. Hey, no, Jane, what I was wondering, I presume, and this is only an observation, I have no factual basis, that the Orange Order is losing its appeal to the younger generation, and so on. I presume the vast majority of Orange Order people are now old men in their suits and their bowler hats. Now, I presume there will also be some, but if I am reading the runes right, there's a detectable change, and that is one of the reasons I think the BBC also reflected that the fact that the days of the 1950s and 60s are gone, that it's not quite the same as it was. During the Troubles as well.
Well,
There's also, but you know the thing, I'd forgotten a lot of what you're after saying, and sometimes when I hear, I've seen or heard a number of sort of orange people and loyalists on about the GA. And it struck me rather forcibly listening to what you were saying is the GA, you can be a man, a woman, black, Jew, Muslim, Christian, non-Christian, lesbian, gay, straight, Protestant, Catholic, whatever. And yet there are people in the loyalist community claim that the GA is sectarian. Talk about when you think about, I had forgotten a lot. I genuinely had, by the way. Like it's an unbelievable criticism from talk about people inside glass houses.
oh yeah, Well, you see, they definitely have to seek around somewhere to get a counterbalance, which would then normalize the Orange Order. I don't think you can normalize the Orange Order. And as you say, the equivalent that they frequently cite is the GAA. Excuse me. Now, the GAA is the very opposite. You've said that the Orange Order is shrinking in its popularity. And I think that's true. I think most young Protestants have other things to do with their time, or Unionists have other things to do with their time and engage in kick the Pope bands. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just as popular as ever. But certainly the GAA is so popular. It's creating problems for itself because it's so powerful and so all-pervasive that there's a danger, you might have to make it more professional than it is at present. That would be a very decisive kind of step. But if the BBC doesn't cover it, I gather that GB News is going to cover it. Is that right, Pat?
That's what brings me to the question I want to ask you, because I'm more interested. I'm on the outside looking in on this rather than you are more expert on this. What is the possible, or where's the angle of GB News? A so-called, well, now I know it's a right-wing channel and it's been set up by the Murdoch people and so on. But what's their angle? A sort of a march and on the 12th of July in Northern Ireland that's sort of ridiculed by most people in Britain. Like Jude, I know English guys. I've worked with a lot of them in the past, and they start to laugh at this thing of these people marching with bowler hats, and they're going, "What?" They think it's some sort of a, how would you say, burlesque type thing. Somebody taking the piss here.
Yeah,
That's definitely honest. I worked for the Daily Mirror, and so on, and they used to send all these guys over. And I remember having a rather lengthy conversation with this well-educated Englishman, and he just took the piss out of it from start to finish. So I like, what's GB's angle? GB News's angle?
Well, GB News, as you know, is a right-wing television. Isn't it television as well as radio, or is it just radio?
Television as well,
I think.
Piers Morgan's on it, and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorris.
And Arlene Foster's on it. Arlene Foster, don't forget Arlene
Foster. I've forgotten about her yet.
So it is clearly a right-wing organization, and I suppose they see the Orange Order, which is also a right-wing organization. So it's obviously more grist to their mill, I suppose. Whether or not a lot of people watch it, I'm not sure. But I suppose that in the end, you might say this. If you were an outsider, or I was an outsider, and I'd never heard of the Orange Order, and one day the band went marching up the road, I'd be out to look at it because it is kind of colorful. Yeah. And it's hard not to be interested in or listen to or watch a marching band. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. And that's, more power to the Orange Order in those terms. But the fact is that when they're passing a Catholic church or chapel, as they call it, they'll crank up the sound and they'll play whatever the most offensive tune they can think of. And that has been the way since I was a child, Pat. Can you believe that? Yeah. And it probably goes back another several lifetimes after that. That was everybody. I couldn't believe it. I remember my sister saying, "Oh yeah, they were coming past the chapel today, and of course they virtually stopped, and they really played terribly loud." and I did that for about 5 minutes
Uh,
and then went on. I couldn't
mm.
understand this because I was born, as you know, to my disgust. No, that's not true. I was born on the 12th of July,
July.
and it clashed with my birthday. But actually, in a way, the fact that you had to have this 12th of July celebrations, for me, from my earliest years, it was, what would you call it, a fissure or a breakage between the other side of the fence, which was full of young Protestant kids, and our family, which is quite large. We would play with those people during the rest of the year. But coming up to the 12th, everything changed. They became really hostile and started firing stones, shouting insults, everything else. And that would go on, you know, for, well, on the 12th it would only be the stone throwing, but that coolness would set in some days before it. They wouldn't come over.
Jude, you know, I was aware too, you know, it came into my head there too. No, in the waterside area of Derry, I remember some years back. Now, normally there's no bother, but you know, if you're driving through certain areas, so loyalist sort of areas, you'd have no bother. You know, you'd see the flags, but see around about the July 12th. See if you're driving a Southern registered car, there were stone throwing attacks and stuff like that. And you sort of go, this is ridiculous. And you know, on July 12th, it's like a dog marking its territory. Suddenly, all these flags and the paint goes on and so on. Jude, you know, you sort of go, but anyway, Jude, anyway, it's one way back in when I joined the Derry Journal first, Jude, everything's a learning experience. And I can't remember who it actually was, but I remember being told a story that the guys coming down for the Apprentice Boys March in Derry, the Orange or other guys, when they'd come from Larne or Ballymena or Portadown, wherever it was, and they were going through Balahi, the wee village in South County Derry. They would stop at the outskirts of the village and march through the village and get back on the bus to the other side of the village. And I says, well, go on, tell me, what was the point of that? And he says, well, look, Pat, you work it out. Balahi, there was one Protestant family, I think, living in Balahi. The other 99% or 90, well, I don't know what the definition of percentage was Catholic. So he said, like, you talk about sectarian, sending out a message and so on, so on. So, like, see the day the Orange Order invites Catholics in, lets women join, and let's sort of turns it out to be some sort of a Mardi Gras festival. I presume we can all turn around and say then it's a non-sectarian organization. But this
they
sort
tried
of,
that, Pat,
I think there's been
they did try that.
Say it again.
They did try
What
that.
did?
An Orange Fest about 10 years ago, I'd say. They tried to talk about it as an Orange Fest, but nobody believed a word of what they were saying.
No, Jude, no, hold on, Jude. Words have to be accompanied by action. If you say this is an Orange Fest, but hold on, Catholics still can't join, women still can't join, and they have to, you know, it's like the sort of the Muslim thing about women cannot go into the main, to use your term, they have to use an antechamber. Like, I would think most modern Christian women or society would see that as unfair. Well, the same applies to the Orange Order. If it's not all embracing, you can't turn around and say it's not discriminatory.
Well, I'm tempted to quote the Groucho Marx thing about any club that would invite me. I wouldn't. I'd have such a low opinion of it. I would not be prepared to join. I think it's a hangover from the past. It's hard to get rid of when something like that's in your blood almost, you know, from the day you were born, I'm sure. It's unfortunate, but I think it's a nice acid test of the Unionists, or certainly Orange Order's willingness to create a fresh sort of start here in the North. And we know it's not going to happen. They find it very, very difficult to break away from the tradition. They almost tout the tradition as being the great thing, regardless of what it is. I mean, there was a tradition of sending kids up chimneys to clear the soot. You know, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds. But that didn't make it good. There was a tradition of slavery. That wasn't making it good either. I would say the same about the Orange Order. I think we've dealt with it sufficiently. You mentioned, Pat, the BBC. Now, the BBC has been in the news because it has been having a little, how shall we put it, a bit of difficulty with one of its former employees. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, no, I just noticed, in fact, I didn't notice it on Friday, I only noticed it, I guess, this morning. Donna Trainer, for years, 30 plus years, she was the face of the sort of Newsline, the 6:30 program on BBC. Well, one of them was certainly the main presenter for a very long number of years. And I noticed she disappeared off the screen. And I was wondering what happened. Then suddenly discovered she was actually bringing a case against them. And she was bringing the case against them: age, I think, sex, and disability. Apparently, she's deaf in one ear, and they tried to move her to a radio program where she'd have to wear earphones and so on. But I think our main claim was basically she had reached a certain age, and the BBC, I don't know what the term would be, that ageism, I suppose, would be the term, and so on. So she took a case, and the BBC settled on Friday without admission of liability. But Jude, the
Does
thought
that mean
occurred
she
to
got
me,
more or less
have
money,
you ever
Pat?
watched?
Do you think that
What?
means she got more or less money having settled?
Well, she said the amount was exaggerated, but that doesn't mean she said it wasn't substantial. So I don't know. But the whole issue, Jude, is I, I sometimes wonder, like, look, if you here, what I'm trying to get at, if you watch Fox News, every presenter is blonde, leggy, busty, and looks like a contestant in the Miss World contest. Now,
How do you know
some
about
of them
their
might
legs,
be,
Pat? How can you see their legs if they're sitting behind a
yeah,
desk?
because just why they always sit on a sofa, and and so on. And if you look up the Fox News presenters, every one of them is a Miss World contest lookalike. No matter. But as really, but why don't we see certain? No, if a woman is an intellectual and she's 65 years of age and she's perfectly good at doing the news, why shouldn't she be a presenter? Why shouldn't she be? Why do you never see that in the
Well,
BBC?
Pat, be honest now. A good-looking woman reading the news is a much more rounded experience for people like ourselves than an ungood-looking woman reading the news. That's the truth of it, isn't it?
Hey, but Jude,
Isn't that the truth?
Jude, you're
Come
getting
on,
yourself
admit
just
it. Is
in
it
trouble
truth
now.
or is it not?
No, no.
It's
You
that
see,
truth.
of course it is. I said, but that's not the point. That is definitely not the point. That is so unfair. If I was a 60-year-old woman who was a total professional, who was very competent, what why should I be bundled off air to make way for some blonde bimbo 22 who has no experience, who's useless and all the rest, but she looks the part? No, there is this, what would you say, discrimination there. And Donna Trainer, I admired her courage for taking the BBC on. She basically said, I am not putting up with us, and I'm not going to go quietly. So, but there was also, there were several other people. Noel Thompson was another one, was sort of at that age as well. Now, okay, there was redundancies, and I'm not saying he was pushed out, but there. I think when you reach a certain age, but then of course, when you look at the other side of the story, what do you call him? David Attenborough is 90-someone, and he's still presenting programs. So, like, surely it should be based on your experience. It should be based on your professionalism, your ability, not on your looks.
Well, I agree with all that, actually. But I do think that certainly age discrimination, maybe it's because I'm the age I am, that I notice it. But the age discrimination is everywhere. Everywhere. Age discrimination probably exists within your own family. Your children, as you get older, begin to look at you more in a different way and treat you in a different way. And, maybe it makes sense. They take on more sort of control of things, and you get older and you sort of sit back a bit. About Donna Trainer, one thing I did that I'm very proud of. I was down in Dublin the time McQueen came, down at the media centre there, when she visited Dublin. And just Donna Trainer was sitting, chatting just with a whole row of various broadcasting people. And I knew her to just nod at it as beginning out of the BBC. But I just something about her. I went over and I said to her, listen, I just want to say this, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you or myself. You're one of the best at doing the job you do. And she was thrilled to bits.
Yeah.
I just think she was a nice person, a good person, and a highly competent person. And that came across in every word she spoke. There's some of the women presenters and men presenters, they come across so stilted and sort of like a speaker wit machine. But Donna I thought she was very good.
Donna had a personality.
She has to, like the rest of us, I suppose, accept the fact that with age, you'll be eased off the center stage. We all, what happens to us all, if some of us want to stay around longer, and some of us manage, very few, of course. But your man that you mentioned, he's Mr. Earth, David. What's David? What? See, that's my age.
Admiral.
Huh? David? David?
Yeah.
Oh, Attenborough, yeah, of course. David Attenborough, he's a contradiction that proves the rule. But really, here's the thing I said one time on a radio discussion about old age. And I said, old people, by and large, I wasn't the oldest person in the room, by the way. Old people, by and large, are uglier and stupider than young people. Now, that's a generalization, but I think it's true. And that would include me, but not you, of course.
Jesus, Jude, I bet you that made you real popular.
Well, I could see the guy beside me who was older than me, and he said, stupider, that's a very interesting word. But it is true, Pat, isn't it? We don't improve with age. We get uglier looking.
Bollocks, Jude.
We do. Even you.
Not at all. Jude, there's a library in your mind, and this, hopefully in my mind, this stage that young people don't have. There's a wisdom and an experience that young people don't have. The Chinese were dead right, and the old Indians, the American Indians, the Native American Indians, they revered the wisdom of the old people because they had learned. One of the things, apparently in a baby and the American Indians, the way they used to sit in the teepee and they used to have the open fire. They let the child up the fire because they reckon the first time the child got burned, it would never go near the fire again. So, Jude, everything's a learning experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're on a loser in terms of saying that older people are always wiser. We know a lot of people who, as they become older, really become dumb and keep repeating stuff they've said. Let me put it like this: John Hume, as he grew older, was not as good a politician as he was when he was younger. Fact.
No, but
okay,
but John, without going too far into it, John, I think John went into a form of dementia.
Yes, that's correct.
John collapsed, and I think was it Austria or somewhere, and didn't get treatment for a while, and apparently it affected his memory.
Yes, that's true, Pat. But I'm saying even before that, as he moved through middle age and late middle age, before any question of Alzheimer's or dementia or anything, he wasn't as effective a politician. He tended to repeat just the same line. Now, effective politicians are on the ball. If old age wasn't a problem, Pat.
No, John used to come down to the office, and I noticed from John, I would have been in his 60s, I noticed a change in him because he'd come down to the office and he would start smoking and he'd start looking at the roof and he wouldn't talk for 5 minutes. And I was going, what's going on here? So something had happened, John, and I think his daughter, I'm not going into too much detail because I don't know. One of his daughters said that he had been ill somewhere and something had happened to his brain and he didn't get oxygen or something for a while and it affected him afterwards. So I think, but I take your point. Look, dementia comes in and we're not as fast. But geez, Jude, are you telling some of the best politicians, Berlusconi, the guy, he's nearly running again. Like Joe Biden gets elected at 80 something.
Pat. Half the Democratic Party is, to put it bluntly, shitting their pants at the thought of Joe Biden going for a second term. Because Joe Biden, like myself, has been known to fall down.
He fell down again there recently.
Yeah, that's right.
I take your point, Jude, but by and large, I don't know. You said it yourself. It's a generalization. Some people, some people know. Some older people are very sharp and are, I was listening to Noam Chomsky the other day.
There's a contradiction, all right. Yeah. I take everything back. I mean, all bets are off when you come to Noam Chomsky. He is absolutely a brilliant mind. And there are exceptions, all right, that's true. But by and large, I mean, it's like you see it in footballers even. I mean, I know football is just a physical activity, although there is judgment and so on involved in it. Once footballers hit 30, their value begins to diminish. They don't tend to be the player they were. And, you could say, oh, well, he's got bringing experience and so on. Yes, he is bringing it, but it's more than outweighed by no longer having the youthful exuberance that they would have had when they were younger. Anyway, that's old age, Pat. I'm afraid you just have to face. Of course, you're only a stripling, really, but at the same time,
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
get you
yeah,
ready for old age, Pat. Serene old age.
yeah. Thank
And
you, thank you.
I want people to flock to your house and say, "Oh, Pat, please come and give us some of your wisdom, if not your blessing." Okay.
Yeah.
What were you talking about? You had a third one. Oh, yes, you were talking about Lord John Patten and what he had to say about Britain on Question Time on, was it Thursday night?
Well, by the way, his name's Chris Patten. He was the last governor of Hong Kong. Chris,
But there's two mistakes I've made because I'm old.
You know,
two mistakes I've made already.
You see it now. But wasn't there John Patten? There was another minister called John Patten.
Oh, no, there's a guy I'm very friendly. Well, I wasn't very friendly with from Derry called Patten. There were Pattens. There were quite a few of them. And one of them was a high school principal over there in the Waterside. And my sister taught with her. Anyway, that's beside the point. That's why I said John Patten.
Yeah.
Should have been Chris.
John Patten. Right. Chris Patten was on Question Time on Thursday night. And you see, Jude, I'm putting this in context. See, this last while, I've seen Jacob Rees-Mogg, I've seen Michael Gove, I've seen Boris Johnson, I've seen Matt Hancock, and all these people come on and say, we've got full employment in Britain. We're now, contrary to what they said about Brexit, the economy will not go into a recession and so on, and we have made trade deals. Chris Patten came on Question Time on Thursday night, and he says, our GDP, he says, we're in a hell of a bad place. He says, our GDP is well below that of France, Germany, Netherlands, and Ireland. He says, and in fact, we're below basically places like Lithuania. And he says that 20% of the poorest people in Britain are worse off than the 20% poorest people in Poland. But he says, here's another statistic. He says, because of our diffs being outside Brexit, he says it's to import our food is now costing us $7 billion a year more. That's according to the London School of Economics. But on top of that, we're having problems getting workforce for the NHS, for the hospitality industry, etc., etc. And he says, basically, he says, and by the way, I should throw in as well, the pound has gone down in value, inflation has gone up, and the whole. And of course, the generalized one, Britain's standing in the world and influence in the world has gone way down. And he says that Brexit is the direct source for most of that. And Jude, it was an unbelievable. It was almost like he had taken a scalpel and cut open the whole wound of Brexit and sort of exposed it. And you could see the looks on some of the people's faces going, Jesus, we didn't realize this.
I think the fact that he was such a prominent Tory, I mean, he was in Maggie Thatcher's cabinet, wasn't he? So
he was chairman of the party as well.
He was a voice of authority, a voice of somebody actually who was well respected. I think it was at one stage, was he in the north? No, maybe as an under.
I was, yeah. I remember the day that, what was it? Was it the Richmond Centre or the Foyle Centre was opened? He was the minister who came down. He performed the opening ceremony. I was at that. It was a wee sort of private function. Go ahead, just.
He's a Catholic, of course.
Yeah,
of course, that doesn't really matter. Yes, I too sat back in my chair and said, by God, he summed that up well. Now, most English people wouldn't deny those facts if they're even remotely honest. The fact that their country has gone down in terms of economic output and morale, prospects, the lot. But they will cite, certainly the Tories will cite, a pandemic, Ukraine, inflation, anything but blame Brexit. And the reason for that is because Brexit, they brought it on themselves. In fact, they voted for it. Yeah. In fact, it wasn't just the Tory politicians. It was everybody in the UK. Yeah. The majority of them went out there and put their vote in for leave. And, this is a pandemic and Ukraine and inflation is inflicted on the population of Britain. Brexit is self-inflicted. And that really hurts. Yeah. It's hard to come around and say, what a bloody fool I was. Some people have said that. I've heard people on TV and they've said that, I was an absolute idiot. I voted for it. Most of them, however, won't do that. They fail to learn a very serious lesson, which is to be humble. To say, I screwed that up big time. And it's good for your soul, and it'd be good for the economy too if they'd come around and admit that, and then begin to say, well, how can we fix this then? Well, obviously it's got to do with the relationship with the EU. So let's establish some kind of relationship. If you still want to stay out, I think in 10 years' time, Pat, they'll have opted in again. We may not see it, but I've a feeling
it's going to cost them billions to opt in again, and so on. And but Jude, of course, one of the things that we are left out of all that, and Patten didn't really make much of a reference. But there's also Brexit has also disturbed the sort of, what would you say, the sensitive balance of relationships between Dublin and London. It's the sensitive balance and the Good Friday Agreement between nationalists and unionists in the north. It's left us this still Stormont not returning. All that, Jude. The trail leads directly to the Brexit door. All those sort of things. So, Jude, Brexit has been pretty much one unequivocal disaster, no matter what way you come in. By the way, I was reading over the weekend. I'm digressing, and maybe I shouldn't, but anyway. Ian Paisley said it could be an ice age before Stormont returns.
Right.
Or sorry,
right
there could be another ice age. So maybe I should get that right before Stormont returns, unless the British government give them what they want. So come on, Dr. Collins, what's your response?
Well, I agree with Ian. I agree with Ian as usual. I agree with Ian. He's dead right. Could be an ice age, but the implication of his statement is that nothing else will happen. Yes, lots of things will happen. At the moment, Britain is, as you say, at the bottom, and Chris Patten has said, is at the bottom of the economic league compared to any other country and countries in Europe and so on. Whereas the south of Ireland is in the EU and doesn't know, well, they should know what to do with their money. There's plenty of things they could use it for. But, it's almost an embarrassment, the surplus that they have. It's in the billions. So here you have the poster boy of the EU is the south of Ireland, and the north, as part of this, as the poorest region in the UK, is the other alternative. There's a lesson to be learned there if people are prepared to learn it. But again, we're all very slow to admit to mistakes.
One of the great. Have you ever watched Nolan or listening to Talkback? Jim Allister, one of his favourite lines. Why would anybody in Northern Ireland, when they talk about unity or whatever, he says, why would anybody in Northern Ireland want to go to a debt-ridden republic when they can stay as part of one of the biggest economies in the world? The debt-ridden economy that he's referring to has got probably the biggest surplus per capita of any country in Europe right now, or potentially has anyway. Britain is... the economy's tanking. But by the way, one other factor he never ever mentioned was his debt is worse than Greece's and so on. But he keeps claiming that Britain's such a big economy, it doesn't matter. Well, if it doesn't matter about Britain, then it doesn't matter about Ireland either. But anyway, Jude, the whole thing is Larry Summers, who's an American, he was on as well on BBC Radio 4 the same morning that Patten made his, and he was absolutely scathing as well. But Richard, here's where I'm getting to with this. Britain is in such a poor position. Patten actually said to people, better get real, that if we want to do the things we keep on doing and so on, he says the taxes will have to rise, services will have to be cut and so on. Now, the DUP are hanging in there and saying, we want this and we want that. Does it ever occur to them, maybe this is the wrong time to be looking for a lot of things that, they should take what they're being offered right now, because what could be coming down the track and the not too distant future could be a lot less. But, and I don't think for a second if Keir Starmer gets in that the unions are going to get anything more than they're getting right now. So should you not compromise when you know what is it somebody said, when you've painted yourself into a corner, don't ask for more paint.
You see, it's an emotional thing, I think. I mean, there are clever people in the DUP, but it is emotional. And it's the old thing of having to say, we got it wrong. We got it wrong big time. So we're going to have to reverse quickly out of this cul-de-sac. And they just can't bring themselves to do that. They know that for the union to operate on any degree of length in the north, they've got to change their policies so that loads of nationalists they're there for the getting, or they were there for the getting, would be willing to have a well-functioning, fair-minded, etc. Northern Ireland. but they show no signs of it. They can't. Is it that they lack imagination, or is it that they lack courage, or whatever it is? But they're never. They talk about was it Trimble said Northern Ireland was a cold house for Catholics. It's been still is a cold house. Still is a cold house. There are places where you go. You're talking about divisions. Places you just couldn't go and show signs that you were Irish. Places you can't go. I remember the time when you said about Southern cars daring not drive. I remember a time when you daren't. And you remember the time when money from the south and money from the north was exactly same. And places like Derry, very often you'd have Irish pennies, with a hen on it.
Yeah.
But I know there was parts of Derry on the water side where you dared go in and try to buy something with an Irish coin. Yeah. So it's a lot of it's got to do with self-esteem and the courage to admit you're wrong, really. Okay, here's one last one for you, Pat. Maybe you can give one last one as well, very quickly. I noticed this figure, very, very interesting. Now, it started with me thinking about Michael D. Higgins with his 92 rooms, himself and his wife. But I moved from that to Prince Charles. Oh, not Prince Charles, King Charles. King Charles. I want you to guess, how many palaces does King Charles own?
I haven't a clue. 4 or 5?
10, sorry, 10. Oh, no, 7 palaces, 10 castles, 12 homes, 56 holiday cottages. And if you put all that real estate together, what you get is I was going to say the princely, but the royal sum of $25 billion. Now, is there not something wrong with that? Even King Charles was the finest man in the world, which he's not. For somebody to own that amount of money in a country where they have people going to food banks, are they crazy? I mean, are they crazy?
But Jude, what I see, he's given up his house on the Brecon Beacons. He had one there, some sort of holiday, well, not holiday home, but he bought it in 2007 for 1.2 million.
The clock's ticking down there, Pat.
He's king.
The clock's ticking. Clock's time's nearly up. Quick.
Aye, but he said he bought it. But the bottom line is, he says he can't live there anymore, so he's selling it. But the other thing as well, Prince William became the Prince of Wales. He inherited the Duchy of Cornwall, and it only brings him in £23 million a year.
Oh, for heaven's sake! They used to say about holiday homes in Wales, "Come home to a real fire." You get it?
Aye, because he used to set them on fire.
Okay, Pat. Thanks very much. Talk to you again. Enjoy the sun.
Talk to you later.